All right, welcome back. Our next session is exploring roast profiles of different processing methods with Mike Ebert. He also has a panel, and we'll start with introducing Mike. He'll give his presentation, and then after his presentation, we'll introduce you to the panel. Here's a little bit about Mike. Mike is the founder of Fire Dancer Coffee Consultants, a company dedicated to helping clients create a personalized strategy to ensure long-term success. He works primarily with roasters, producers, retailers, drawing from his extensive experience in all facets of the specialty coffee supply chain to guide clients in reaching their potential. Mike is an authorized SCA trainer for the Specialty Coffee Association, a certified preventative controls qualified individual, and lead trainer for food safety, and co-chairs curriculum for the SCA Educational Advisory Council, which develops new educational experiences for the specialty coffee community. Welcome, Mike.
Hello, everyone.
There he is.
Finally, I've been listening to Carl in the room next to me all day long.
Well, it's a pleasure for us to be here, and we can't wait to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to sign off.
Okay, I'm going to launch my screen here, and we will begin. I'm assuming everyone can see it, because I can't see you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Mike Ebert, as she said, from Fire Dancer Coffee Consultants. So my little role in this is we're trying to have a couple different individual sessions, from Rick's to Carl's to Phyllis's, and the one following this, but have some intertwining threads. So we're going to focus on processing methods. How do they differ? And really where this came from is even just personally. Some of these newer methods, some not so new, pulp natural or honey, even myself with 30 plus years of roasting experience, they sometimes frustrate me. And I hear this from clients and students. How do they handle them? They're a little bit different. So we're going to explore that, why that is. Be very clear, going back to what Carl said, there is not anything you take away from today, a secret method to roast these methods or the sweet spot. It's all subjective. However, there are some things you need to take into account. So we're going to explore it first. I'm going to go through about 20 slides of just kind of the traditional processing methods that we're probably all familiar with, and a little bit deeper focus on some of these newer methods. And then a little bit about the chemistry of what these methods do to the bean. And then I'm going to talk to a panel of roasters for their insight. How have they developed approaches? How do they look at these different coffees? And then we're going to follow up with a tasting that's a little bit related to this. So no further ado, we're starting with the coffee cherry. You've all seen this, and if you could see my cursor, our goal is to get the seed out. That's what contains 300 or more volatile organic compounds. That if we do everything correctly, we follow Carl's chemistry to a T, so I'm sure you all have it memorized by now. My head still hurts, but we may create up to 650 new, okay? So we take a little deeper look, and really what we're focused on is the center cut of the bean is what has that 300 volatile organic compounds in it. What we need to do in processing methods is how do we get there, okay? Coffee fruit is a little bit different. It's classified as a drupe, which is a family of fruit products characterized with a fleshy fruit with a paracrop that is pericarp that is clearly differentiated into exocarp, mesocarp, and endocarp. The problem with coffee, okay, is it's a little different than a peach or a prune, where they can do processing methods, just peel basically the outer skin off. Coffee doesn't really do that, okay? So in general, there was a question earlier about mucilage and what does that mean? In different fruits, it can mean different things, different layers, okay? I prefer to simplify it, okay, and be very simple, okay? That I talk about these very simply. We have the epicarp, which is the skin, the mesocarp, which is the mucilage, which, going back to that last slide, combines a couple things, and then the endocarp, the parchment, okay, that eventually comes off during hulling. So to keep it kind of simple, not confuse the issue, not exactly pure science of fruit, but in coffee, makes it easier for us all to understand. So traditionally, this is how we have processed coffee. So these terms you may or may not be familiar with, okay? These actually came from work from World Coffee Research, the development of the new flavor wheel, and people outside the industry that were very confused, scientists, agronomists, etc., by all these different methodologies. And to be honest, over the years, I've been doing this 35 years. The first time I started teaching courses like this, I would have to have them written on my hand because they would confuse me. A lot of different vernacular, a lot of slang. So it was suggested, as the story goes, that it was to the science manager of the SCA at the time, to how about we call them by the state in which the fruit was dried, which the seed was dried, because that's what imparts all the sensorial differences, okay? So these are newer terms. So parchment dried on the upper right, washed coffee. We've taken everything off. We don't dry it. Cherry starts out at 60% moisture. Gold, during processing, get it down to 12. Many different reasons for that. But it's the state that we take it down to that 12%, okay? So parchment dried or washed, fruit dried, the oldest, simplest, okay? It's simple. You pick it, put it on a patio, dry it. Natural, otherwise known as. Pulp dried, a little bit newer. Semi-washed, there's different terms for it. Also could refer to honey, okay? Then there's this kind of oddball out there, seed dried, okay? Otherwise known as giling basa or wet hull, primarily found in Indonesia. Various reasons for that we'll explore in a little bit. So these are kind of the traditional methods. And what do they look like? You know, a very simple review. Most of you probably are aware of this. You know, we receive some cherry. It's been picked. We sort. You know, all methods, they do some sorting. You know, even the best pickers don't pick only ripe cherry. Okay. Then they sun dry. They rake it consistently. This is the oldest methodology. Okay. There's a misperception out there that these are typically lower quality. Okay. Not necessarily true. Newer methods, when we talk about raised drying beds, where they get them up off the ground, promote more even airflow. We're seeing very high quality naturals or fruit dried coffee. Often, one of the driving forces of why a producer may use this, lack of water. Pretty simple. So kind of the traditional way that coffee's been processed. Then we get to parchment dry, otherwise known as washed. So same thing, we're receiving the cherry, we're doing some sorting, okay, and then we pulp it, okay. It's a simple way is to describe what pulping is. We're popping that center cut out, we're popping the seed out, okay. Then we're putting it in underwater to ferment, okay, and we're removing kind of the pectin layer. That's part of the pulp, going back to my early simple description of it, okay? Then it's dried down to the 12% moisture on a patio, sometimes mechanical dryer. So the key is the drying after all that has already been taking place, okay? And fermentation, because we're going to explore some methods going forward where we're doing different things with fermentation that's been done before. Technically, you know, in this method, you know, we're breaking down that mucilage that's surrounding the parchment, okay? Happens naturally in water, 12 to 72 hours. Nothing really in traditional methods of wash has been added to the water, okay? This takes a little longer, colder climates, higher elevations, etc. What's happening is different bacteria, enzymes used, they all contribute to that degradation, getting that mucilage off before we dry it. Not a lot is known to a degree of each one of them. And that's what it's going to lead to us in a couple slides, some of these newer methods. It's the result of experimentation. Which one is contributing to it? How is it contributing to the sensorial cup profile. Then there is this pulp dried. And I like to lump pulp dried into two categories, especially when we're about to talk about roasting. Okay. I don't know this definitively, and I may have to go ask Mr. Reinhardt about this a little later. Maybe he could chime in the chat box. But I believe Brazil was one of the oldest or one of the original kind of not inventors of pulp dried. But I like to take theirs out separately than the rest of the world, where they may call it honey, because they are so mechanized. They do a pulp natural that almost roasts like a washed coffee. Okay, very consistent. Okay, density, how it roasts, etc. But we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But you're receiving the cherry, you're sorting, you're pulping, but you're not removing that pectin layer. Okay, you're drying in the sun. I've heard rare cases of that being done mechanically. I personally find that might be a little bit difficult. And then it's stored and conditioned before it's shipped. Okay, so if you look at the picture, you see that pectin layer attached to the parchment. Okay, so this is another, there may be some confusion out there on what is black honey versus what is yellow honey. In general, there is no best practice or standard practice throughout the world. I've even had producers in classes argue over their way is the way and your way is the highway, so to speak. So generally, black honey would mean more of the pectin is left on, more of the pulp is left on that parchment, or in some cases, it's just not turned as often. So it has a bigger impact on the sensorial quality of the cup. So a black honey would be closer to a natural in cup quality. A yellow honey would be closer to washed. Okay, they are harder to dry than parchment dried and even fruit because they're a little bit inconsistent. You got to pay more attention to that. So then there's this oddball I talked about, Sumatra. Typically we see this, okay, and there's various reasons why this occurs in Sumatra, where they literally have to take it down to the seed. All those prior methods, we have to still go through hulling. In natural, we got to take off that dried skin and pulp and the parchment. In washed honey, pulp natural, we've got to still go through hulling, take off that parchment. Okay. Indonesia, they sort pulp, maybe dry for a little bit, do a little washing, maybe hull right away. Various reasons. It's a very fragmented affair in Indonesia, where they're growing on less than 10 hectares in their backyard. They've got to wait for the local exporter to come around. During harvest season, not a lot of sun. So they got to facilitate the drying, so to speak. Okay. So there's many variations of this where they pulp, wait a certain amount of time, get it down to about a 20% moisture, then hull and take it down to 12% in the seed. Okay. Typically on the ground. Think about your average cup quality of a Sumatra, earthy. That might be related. Some cases, they do it quicker. There's not a standard practice necessarily in Sumatra. So wet hulled, a little bit different of an animal. But those are your four main methods. And this is general, now very general, sensory differences. Your parchment dried typically has the highest acidity, more complex cup. Now, makes it sound like I say that's better than all the others. Not true. It's just you've stripped away some of the simple sugars, some of that simple sucrose Cara was talking about by drying it just in parchment. So it's a little bit more complex. They like to say the full identity is present. It's a little easier to tell origin differences and varietal differences. If we drop down to the fruit dried, it's typically the sweetest. We haven't taken away that simple sugar. Okay. Biggest body, earthy, fruity. Okay. Your pulp dried, somewhere in the middle, depending how much of that pectin was left on while it was dried. And then you get your seed dried, earthy, spicy, funky, fruity. Okay. But the thing to remember before we move on to these new methodologies, okay, is in general, the sensory profile was partially, if not largely, determined by what state the seed was in when it was dried. So when we take it from that 60% and down to that final 12%, what state was it in? That's generally how coffee from the same farm, same variety, okay, same elevation, processed differently, is going to show in the cup. It's because of these processing methods, okay? So now we're going to move forward, new methodologies, okay? And the thing to remember, these new methods add some caveats to what I just said, that the concept of the sensory profile being changed merely by how the seed was dried. Now we're adding fermentation and other things at different stages, not just when the seed is dried, okay? So one thing before I get into all of these is understand there are variations of each one of these. There's a lot of experimentation going on in the world right now. And I kind of picked what I thought were some of the top 4 or 5 to keep us a little bit focused, or we could talk all day about this. So the first one you may have heard about, carbonic maceration. So what is that? So cherries, okay, basically are placed in water hole and allowed to ferment from the inside out, okay, before being pulped and then dried on a patio. So they still receive the cherries, they're still sorting, but they ferment the whole cherries. Now, I said there's variations. There's a variation of this where they, and it's kind of related to the next one, okay, where they'll actually pulp it and then ferment it, okay? But in this one, traditionally, it's whole cherries underwater and allowed to ferment from the inside out. Then they're pulped and finally dried down to 12% moisture, okay? So little variation on, it's just the drying method that's imparting a different sensorial profile for that particular coffee. And then this is probably out of all of them that we've maybe all heard of, at least for me, anaerobic fermentation. Okay. This is actually kind of almost from the wine industry directly. Okay. In this case, okay, it starts off very similar to washed. They are receiving cherry. They are pulping, doing some sorting, pulping. They ferment, and then they do the washing, so to speak, in closed tanks free of oxygen. If you go back to this picture, that's what a tank may look like. So very similar to how they did things in wine. So we're going to talk a little bit, and I've got a couple guests that are going to talk about this as some of the reasons why, but versus typical washed, which is done in, if you've been to a farm, they look like kind of rough swimming pools, cement holes in the ground, outside, no climate control, okay? My guess is a little hard to clean, okay? This is a page out of the wine industry. Let's do this in stainless steel tanks, in some place we could control the temperature. In this case, free of oxygen, okay? And what happens when it's deprived of that oxygen, okay, the yeast are suppressed and other bacteria become more active, okay? And so typically what happens in these, instead of a fruit or alcohol related note that comes from the yeast, these bacteria tend to generate more lactic acid notes. We find in yogurts and cheeses, some sour beers, so to speak, fermented vegetable preparations, sauerkraut, kimchi, okay? And again, what makes them anaerobic, okay, is no oxygen, free of oxygen during this state. Then there is a little bit of a variation. Probably one of the first ones I heard where they call it a double wash. Okay. So what does that mean? Really the same thing as washed, except during that ferment and wash stage, they drain the water out, put fresh water to wash it a second time. Okay. So left for a little additional time. Not necessarily cleaner flavors, possibly brighter, a little bit more nuanced, so to speak. And this is one I've actually only heard one person doing this, Ada Battier, El Salvador. But I tried this coffee and it is delicious. It's quite possible that it's other people are doing. But what they do, or what she did, was cascara, the fruit, the skin of the coffee fruit is dried. She turns it into a tea. That tea is what's used during the washing process. Okay, so instead of putting it into water after pulping, they're putting it into this tea. Then they're draining. In some cases, they're doing a double wash with some water, but then it's dried down to the 12% moisture. So a different way, they're changing the sensorial process because of that process. And then this, I've always been probably the most fascinated in, and there is very little, well, I should say there's a lot of research and writing on it, but very little definitive on what's being achieved from it. And in this yeast fermentation, what they're doing is it's basically a wash method, but instead of just water, they're adding different yeast during fermentation. Okay. Scott Labs, this was the same lady I just spoke about in El Salvador and others working on this. Scott Labs, who has made not their primary focus on yeast for wine, has now got involved to create yeast specific for coffee. Okay. And this is to alter that sensorial profile of that particular coffee. Okay. So most of these new methods, the prior methods, natural obviously started as a simplistic pick, didn't have the technology, didn't understand it. Washed sometimes is misunderstood, that it was done for quality reasons. Not really. It was done for volume. How can we process more volume consistently with less risk? Okay. And it kind of was the early darling child of specialty coffee. We're now evolving beyond that, where we're looking at these others. Pulp natural was really just, in the case of Brazil, this is my own personal opinion, that it was the world's largest producer. They were doing nothing but natural. Hey, we need a different product. Water was a problem. So, hey, we're going to do something a little different. Okay. But most of these new methods we're seeing focuses a little bit more on, yes, they want to prepare the coffee in a safe, risk-free manner, but it's about sensorial profile, what us in specialty like. Okay, my opinion. And we're gonna get a second opinion here in a little bit on that, on what is causing some of these new methodologies. What's the push? What's the demand, so to speak? But how are they different? What does this matter in the cup profile? So we traditionally, if you've taken any roasting classes or you've been a roaster for a while, the difference between a natural and a washed, okay, typically your washed is denser, okay, a little higher charge temp, could take a little bit more energy, maybe a little bit more aggressive. Naturals typically a little less dense, a little lower charge temp. And when I talk lower or higher charge temps, I'm not talking hundreds of degrees. I'm talking 20. 25. It's not that much. Okay. So natural's a little gentler because you've got some of that, more of that sugar on the outside of the bean. You don't want to scorch it, burn it, so just a little bit gentler. Okay. Naturals tend to go a little quicker after first crack because of that density. So there's a little bit more. I think that was a question that was early on. It's because of that little lower density. Okay. Not necessarily because of the sugars. Okay. But this is some of those reasons why. So most of these new methods I was not able to find, and I've been looking for this since we first announced we're going to do this, a little bit more science on those new processing methods. There's some out there, but some of it I found a little debatable. So this is one that I've used in our green professional classes that we teach. That shows just focused on sugar. We're not going to get into all the different chemicals Carl talked about. We're just going to focus on sugars, okay? And look at the difference between the sugar content by the processing method, okay? A little bit surprising on the amount of sucrose in a honey process, which kind of starts to, for me, open my eyes a little bit of why I have a little bit of problem with them. And to reiterate that a little bit, always up to first crack, they always look, I always feel like they're uneven roasting. And I got this little guy in my ear going, Mike, you got to do something. Fix it, fix it, fix it. When I know that's what they are and I don't want to overreact. Okay. So that's going to kind of foster or lead to our discussion with the entire panel on their different processes of how they figure out how to roast these new processes and what their approach is, because there's not one right way. There's different ways to achieve different cup profiles. But it starts with this, that they're chemically different. So we want to approach them. So I'm stealing this slide from Carl, okay? Because, you know, I had to follow him. It's the only way I could keep up with them. You know, I followed Rick, Carl, and Phyllis. You guys all put me in a tough position here. Anyway, but I love this slide, you know, because it talks about, you know, the different things that are in coffee before and after roasting. Okay. This is where we end up. Okay. This is a washed coffee, very generic. Not every coffee has the same amounts. That's what makes coffee wonderful. Okay. But the effect of green and what happens when you're done. What is in the roasted coffee bean? Some things disappear. Some things are enhanced. Some are shrunk. Okay. And with everything, there's a cause and effect. One of the questions earlier was, I believe, you know, how can I maintain malic acid but reduce acetic acid? You really can't. Okay. No. Yeah, keep malic acid. Malic acid basically breaks down at about first crack. By 400 degrees, it's almost gone. Acetic acid tends to grow. You can, you know, a lot of acetic acid comes from the different processing methods. So there's various amounts, and depending on the processing methods, it can increase as much as 25%. So every decision you make at a roaster, you know, there's a cause and effect. I want to get this. This is what happens. This week we have a roasting class going on in our facility. That's what we do during roasting intermediate course. Is we explore a coffee many different ways to show that. Oh, you want brightness, but here's the price you're going to pay. You want body. Here's the price you're going to pay. You want fruit and floral. Okay. It's a balancing act. And all of this, everything Carl took into play is the answer why, which is why it gets pretty sophisticated, as you learned from Carl. So in general, you may have seen this slide. I've used it forever because I think it's a very simple. It's a roast profile. You know, your degree of quality would be temperature, lighter, darker would be your time. Okay. But in general, if you roast quicker, you're going to focus on acidity. That's going to be the primary. If you had to pick one descriptor out of that particular roast profile, it would be acidity. If you take it a little longer, and I might add also, say we've taken all these to the same temperature. So we're not looking at different darknesses per se or roast degrees. We're looking at just longer time, let's say to get the 420. Let's say at the tip of that red line, that top, we hit 420 really quick. That's going to be our focus. If we go over to the green line, so we take it even longer, our focus is going to be on body, but at the expense of the aroma, flavors, and acidity. If we go in the middle line, our focus is going to be on the aroma or the origin flavors. That's the sweet spot, right? No, it depends. And this is subjective. General, don't write this down as the gospel according to Ebert. But I think most of us would agree that, in Ethiopia, fruit, floral, whether it's washed or natural, I'd probably be between that red and blue line somewhere. Guatemalan. I love my Guatemalans. I'm not a big fan of them between the red and blue line. I like them between the blue and green line. Very subjective, very how I like my coffee. Okay, but this is something in time as roasters, you're learning. You're going to start getting a kind of rough idea of different origins, what's available, and what you're looking to achieve. So in general, if you roast lighter in color, you're going to maximize the acidity. You haven't broke down the chlorogenic acid. Malic and citric don't break down till after first crack, but very soon after first crack. So if you take a coffee that's just right out of first crack, that's where you're going to get your malic and citric. However, okay? It's going to have a thin body, okay? It could be on the sour end. It'll be lowest in bitterness, more fruity and floral. If you roast completely the other way, you're maximizing the bitterness, okay? Bitterness, Maillard reaction, okay? You know, we have heard a lot about Maillard reaction in roasting. And everyone talks about the Maillard reaction time and shortening or lengthening that. And it's a little confusing because Maillard reaction actually runs, it's the largest influencer of coffee flavor. It starts at about 300. It doesn't stop. Its main phase, or where it's in control, is that beginning. Okay, but it continues into caramelization, pyrolysis, Strecker degradation. They all feed off each other. But the longer Maillard reaction goes, those melanoids, bitter, more bitterness. Okay, I get not a kick, but people who I like my dark roast because it's strong. I want to say to them, "Oh, you like your coffee bitter, don't you?" Now, you can't say that to the average consumer, but it's essentially what happens. But your acidity goes down, and you get more roast flavors. So it's very general. So with that, what I want to do is I want to welcome Connie back to introduce our panel quickly. So I think I need to stop sharing my screen.
Here I am. You can either stop sharing or we can share. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Thank you for presenting the different processing methods in such a way that was really easy to understand. It was really well laid out. I commend you because I know it's not always easy to understand some of those methods. I'd like to introduce the panel. We have Danna, Nikki, Eileen, and Tony. So Danna Wasserman is a trader with Sucafina, which has a focus on buying East African specialty for the North American market. She started in the industry as a trader in 2014 after graduating from Tulane University in New Orleans. She is currently based in Brooklyn, New York. Her favorite coffee is Kenya. She's interested in all things sustainability driven in the coffee industry, carbon footprint, processing methods, packaging, and how to incentivize more sustainable practices in coffee. Next, we have Nikki Amore. Nikki Amore is licensed Arabica Q grader, Specialty Coffee Association certified roaster, an SCA certified barista, and an authorized SCA trainer. She's been very busy. She's currently the roast master, green bean buyer, and roasting instructor at Café Amouri in Vienna, Virginia. Nikki designs and teaches roasting courses at the Café Amouri's Experiences SCA certified premier training lab, advises wholesale customers regarding their coffee operations, supervises the roasting team, and also manages the community outreach events for Café Amouri. She has worked on Café Amouri's Diedrich IR12 for 6 years, roasting, developing profiles, editing automated profiles, and maintaining, cleaning, and troubleshooting programs. Nikki has a BS in Religious Studies and American Culture from Randolph-Macon Women's College and MDiv from Union Theological Seminary. And last, we have Eileen Schwab and Tony Tausch. Eileen and Tony's professional lives started at the University of Cincinnati, where Eileen did research in molecular genetics, and Tony was doing clinical research in obesity and hypertension in children. This just goes to show you your true passion in life isn't always what you study in college. In 1996, Tony and Eileen purchased the Coffee Emporium, which was established in 1973 and is the oldest family-owned coffee house in Ohio. Tony and Eileen believe in investing in relationships from seed to cup by buying coffee directly from farmers to ensure that they receive top dollar for their hard work and quality coffee. Coffee Emporium has been selected Best Overall Coffee House by Cincinnati City Beat magazine for the last 12 years in a row. This recognition, which is based on votes from the community, is proof that people of Cincinnati value and appreciate the hard work of the Coffee Emporium team members. Welcome, Danna, Tony, Nikki, Eileen. Hello.
There are videos.
Hello.
Hi. We
Thank you,
just
Connie.
need Tony and Eileen.
We're getting there.
All right, all right. You're almost there.
Almost there.
All right. Well, I am going to sign off and let you all take over.
Awesome. Thank you, Connie. So I'm going to start out with just more. I'm going to leave my screen up. I only had 2 more slides. One was just, variations of all these methods. First off, all those methods I talked about, and I'm sure Danna can even expound on this. There's variations of each one of them. There's not this, simple natural and wash like we all grew up with. But, I just want to ask you, as, from Sucafina and, working with farmers and roasters, your opinion on what's driving this. I mean, we heard a little bit this from Phyllis earlier, but I'd love to hear your take on, what are they trying to achieve with some of these things?
Sure. Well, hi, everyone. And yeah, I can definitely touch on that, Mike, so thanks. So the specialty market has created a demand for differentiated products. And as we all know, producers are fantastic innovators, and they've been working to create these different products to sell into a higher market. So some of these different experimental methods that Mike touched upon in his earlier slides, like carbonic maceration or anaerobic processing or yeast inoculation, are ways producers can seize this opportunity and can create more value around their products. So it's really driven by value in a way to, just achieve more margin and create a higher livelihood revenue. That's one main focus. We're seeing with yeast and the incorporation of yeast inoculation, it almost acts as a way of insurance with some of these more experimental processes. So it outcompetes some of the other microorganisms that are present in the coffee. And so you can have more control and sway.
Oops, lost you.
Hear me?
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. So I'm not sure where I cut out, but basically, the yeast kind of acts as insurance, and it can outcompete other microorganisms that are present in the fermenting process, and you can kind of have sway over the flavor profile and your end result of the cup profile. And so I can kind of touch upon, Mike had mentioned Scott Labs. At Sucafina in Burundi, we use Café, and we focus on their 3 strains, which is Intenso, Oro, and Sima. And it's really cool because you can basically choose some different attributes that are present in the coffee originally, and then you can play up different flavor profiles. So if you want something that's, with more acidity, or if you want, something fruitier, you use one strain versus another. And in Burundi as well, we're really seeing, because of reduced volumes, we're really turning to these experimental methods, not as a fun thing on the side, but as a real need to secure, livelihood, to basically make a profit and support these farmers, and to continue to support them when we're seeing such reduced volumes, which is not really possible with the standard methods of producing coffee. And then finally, the other main reason would really be environmentally. So with dry fermentation and natural process, it uses less water. And with yeast, it helps break down the mucilage. And so again, there's less water needed. You can do more of a rinse as opposed to a full wash, and achieve a really beautiful cup.
Thank you. That was very interesting. What I'd like to quickly, and this is where Nikki and Tony and Eileen will never ask me back again because I didn't prepare them for this. But I'd like to start with Nikki and then go to Tony and Eileen. It's just, as a roaster, and I just thought about this as Danna was talking, is, as a roaster, what do you find interesting or exciting, or we'll get to the roast profile section, but Nikki, what's your thoughts on these new methods?
I think they're extremely exciting. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten to my hands on a lot of those brand new ones. I roast primarily, washed, dry, honeys, all kinds of the different kinds of honeys. But yeah, I think it's very exciting, and I'd like to get my hands on more. if I can.
Thank you. On that topic, for this, the initial intent was to get many different methods and do a kind of broader tasting, and it was difficult. And it seems just the last couple of weeks, I'm seeing them like everywhere on different importers' offering list. Where 6 months ago, I don't remember seeing as many. Tony, Eileen, your thoughts on?
Awesome. So, Mike, we were actually here in our roasting house, and I think one of the things that we also can kind of bring that's unique, because first of all, it's been an amazing panel. It's been very exciting, and we actually have a cafe, like Nikki has a cafe, so we get to see it from what the customer is consuming and trying and interested in. And in our roasting house, we see that it kind of takes a team. So we actually have also our team here. and these are the guys too, who are going to be the ones who have to drive the interest and they have to drive the interest in the buy-in to why this is so important. So the piece about this is education on all levels. When you look at it, it gets very complicated. And as you're knowing that there also is lots of challenges in the roasting part of it, but also in how am I going to get this on the people who drive our business, and that is our customers, and the people who drive our business is our team, so that when they taste it, they can understand all the complexity that goes into it. And
that's very true. And unfortunately, like Nikki, we have not had a chance to try all these different types of coffee, all these different processes. We're excited to try some new and exciting ones as well. A lot of the coffees that we buy, of course, are washed and dried as well. So
semi-hot, yeah.
Sumatras.
Have you, like Nikki, done some honey type pulp naturals?
We have not. No, Nikki, I think, did, but we have not. Right.
Okay. Well, then here's what I'd like to go back to is just kind of talk about roasting and with I'll add some of my personal experience with roasting honeys and pulp naturals. But I want to approach it from this effect is that, we've got the first phase, what Carl, the drying phase. So we have that roughly 12% moisture. We're not taking it all out. We're taking the free out, which is, there's still bound moisture. So up to about 300 degrees. So what I'd like to hear from each one of you is that stage. Okay. Then the next stage, kind of Maillard reaction. So 300, we're turning yellow. We're leading into caramelization. We're turning cinnamon up to first crack. And then kind of first crack and beyond, kind of development time and the like. And, we'll start with you, Nikki, and kind of how you approach each one of those phases with a coffee that's maybe a little bit more finicky. Are there things you do different?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, it's great to be here, and thank you, Mike, for a great presentation. You explained all those processes really well, and they get very complicated. I, for one, as a roaster, love the challenges of roasting all the different kinds and just the nuances of like the yellow honey, the red honey, the black honey, and just the differences in roasting them. It's a big challenge, but it's one of the funnest parts of being a roaster. So for drying, drying to me is the most important part in terms of setting up a roast. I don't like to leave a lot up to guessing. I have hard goals that I like to meet in drying, like turnaround of 166 to 170 degrees and a rate of rise peak of 37 to 38. I've arrived at those numbers from a lot of testing and taste comparisons. If I'm going too fast during drying and hitting a rate of rise peak of 40, 41, I find the coffee to come out too sharply sweet or tart or too acidic. At the same time, I'm going to, if I'm going too slow and I end up being in the mid 30s for my peak rate of rise, I find the coffee comes out flat, papery, and generally lacking sweetness. I will say too, it can be difficult to figure out how to reach these numbers on a Diedrich. That was one of my great challenges when I first started on it. And I'm on the IR12. I really had to push the boundary, particularly with my charge temperature, and try just like way higher temperatures than I've ever heard anyone doing. But it's paid off, and I can do a big batch size, like 17, 18 pounds, and still meet my goals. So that's how I approach drying. Should I go through?
Yeah, continue, and then we'll go to
Right. Sure. So Mayard being in the middle between drying and first crack, it's not a stage where I typically have hard goals like I do in drying. When the coffee comes out of drying, it's coming out with a certain amount of momentum, and this momentum is really important as it will help set up the next stage for success, which is first crack in the development stage. I generally look for a rate of rise in the mid-20s as the coffee goes through Mayard. All in all, from the time or temp the coffee turns that bright and uniform yellow color around 308 degrees till the time when first crack starts, I'm spending about 3.5 to 4 minutes in Mayard. Although I don't concern myself too much with whether Mayard is 30 seconds longer or shorter, I feel like I do get fuller, less one-note flavors by staying in that 3 to 4 minute range. My paramount concern is having control as I enter first crack. If my rate of rise is in the mid-20s as I enter first crack, I know, at least for washed coffees, that it won't crash. The rate of rise won't crash, and I'll be able to reach my desired development time and temperature. So I'm not necessarily saying a shorter Mayard is bad. There's just the risk with that of going into first crack with a higher rate of rise, as we've all done, and the roast takes off and it's flown way past your desired end temperature. Likewise, I don't think a longer Mayard is bad. It's just you risk going into first crack much slower and drawing out first crack more. Instead of having a nice condensed crack, you get an elongated crack, and you risk muting acidity and other flavors. So going into first crack, at least for washed coffees, I'm looking for a rate of rise, again, in that mid-20s, which ensures that as the beans enter first crack, there's enough momentum for them to power through, even with a low to zero gas output. I look for a crack that is fairly loud and condensed, so not super spread out. The bulk of first crack lasts for me around 1.25 to 1.5 minutes. I do take a different approach with naturals, just as Mike said, since instead of losing momentum during first crack, they will speed up. We've all been there. And then, you have to take your naturals a bit darker because first crack still hasn't ended. So my approach is to lower my fuel sooner with naturals. I'm careful though not to lower it too soon, or else first crack is again drawn out. And my goal with both washed and naturals is to have that condensed first crack so that the beans are able to reach a similar stage or a roast level all at once. If half the roast starts cracking 30 seconds in, the acidity in those beans will be roasted out sooner than the second half. So to create a nice, bright, acidic roast, if that's what I want to keep as many of those beans as possible from going much beyond first crack before I end my roast. All right, so now last development stage, whereas the other stages help set up coffee for success. That's how I view those. Other stages, they're setting up the coffee for success. Development for me is where the real flavor profile is created. And this, has a lot to do with roast degree. So whether you're making it light or medium or dark, but also with how much acidity you want in your light roast, and also how much, chocolate, and what kind of chocolate you want in your dark roast. For me, development times go hand in hand with finish temperatures, your end temperatures. So for a light roast, generally I'm not going beyond that 1.25 to 1.5 minutes beyond, where the bulk of first crack ends. For a medium roast, I'm about 2 to 2.25 minutes past the end of first crack. That extra time and roast degree give the coffee more muted acidic notes and added body. And then for a dark roast, my goal is a 3 to 3.5 minute development. Unlike first crack, I enter into second crack slowly at a low heat and low rate of rise, being careful not to have too much heat as a second crack takes off.
Thank you. That was very thorough. Lots of great comments too. I do agree with you. The controlling first crack is to me one of the most important things. And it's not necessarily a particular rate of rise at that time. It's just knowing I can do what I want at that point, so to speak. So with that, let's hear from Tony and Eileen on their approaches.
Okay. Can you hear us? There we go. Oh, can you hear us? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Now we can't. No, we can't hear you now.
All right, there we go. So we've been roasting coffee for about 20 years now. But the interesting thing about it is we have a Diedrich IR12 that we started with. That roaster allowed us to roast, as you know, 12 kilos of coffee at a time. However, what was particularly difficult about it was the fact that we had a smokestack that went up the side of the building 8 stories. And even though the people from DiedrichRoasters told us not to do this, we had no choice whatsoever. We tried everything we could. So it actually worked out quite well for many, many years. Believe it or not, even with that fan, we just had to make sure that we took a chimney sweeper thing and brushed down the smokestack and things like that. And of course, kept it very, very clean. The IR12 that we have, and we still have it, is not a computer generated or computer driven machine. So it was always very hands-on. You always had to be right there. You always had to watch it. And taking the classes that I did from Diedrich a long time ago, again, almost 20 years ago, we were roasting, being in the Midwest, we roast coffees not only to a full city, but to a French roast. And believe it or not, we even take one slightly darker than that to an Italian roast. It's very, very popular. People still seem to love it. It hurts us to roast it that way, but you know, people seem to love it, and we sell quite a bit of it. When we get into the roast, we start off usually, like Nikki was saying, I think we start off at a slightly higher temperature, certainly than what we saw from Carl's demonstration or a presentation, was that we were starting coffee at around 420 to 425 degrees. It would, the temperature of course would drop, and then we'd have a nice slow rate of rise. A lot of our coffees, our full city coffees, we will take and pull out right into and just a second past first crack at around 424, 425 degrees. Our French roasts will take a slightly darker. We'll take that almost up to 450 degrees, 455, depending on the temperature. We are not in where we are now. We are not in a climate controlled area. So in the summertime, this roasting house will be roughly 100 degrees without even turning the roaster on. In the wintertime, it can get very cold here, and it's constantly at a 40-degree temperature. So of course, you're putting room temperature green coffee into the roaster. You're starting it, of course, at a much higher charge rate, and that affects it a lot too. So tasting it, you know, we have all of our customers, of course, our employees, try our coffee every single day. So that is how we can kind of keep track of how things are going, you know. So that's just the interesting thing. So what we have problems with, of course, is the temperature of the outside, soon to be the cicadas that will be flocking around here. But that is what we do. Our last roast, the Italian roast, we take to around 460 degrees. And again, that's a pretty dark coffee. We know we're watching that very close to make sure we don't have a flame. And of course, they say that you're not a true roaster until you've actually had a fire. And it's one of the nice things about DiedrichRoasters is if you ever do have a fire, and I'm not saying that we have, But if you ever do have a fire, you can get the parts overnighted, or you can go straight to Granger and get any parts that you need. So we've never been down for more than 24 hours in our roasting.
You've never had a fire and you heard all that from someone else.
Exactly. Yeah. And, and the fire department that comes to us they only come for the free coffee. They don't come to put out any smoke that you see coming out of the chimney.
I had the same problem running roasting plants. I had the annual fire inspection, and one guy came to my office with his hands up. So we're running a little late here, so I'm going to turn it back to Connie for questions for all of us before we move on to our next session. Connie, you want to come back and fire some questions at us?
Of course. Great job, everyone. Really impressive. Let's see. We only have time for a couple, so hopefully we can get through a couple. Let's see. Our green broker mentioned that there's a traditional washed and mechanically washed coffees. He said that mechanically washed coffees use a far lower amount of potable water. Has a qualitative difference been noticed in the process? And is there an increase in its usage? And is there a way to find out a rough percentage of producers using this method?
I have not seen anything as far as who's using what when it comes to that. I don't know if Danna's still on, but she may have a little bit more on that. I have not seen. I've heard comments, and I've tasted coffees that have been, sorry, I'm going back to the question so I can see it. Where they've taken off that mucilage mechanically and they haven't tasted as good. And when I've gone back and asked questions, it appears to be under the heading of operator error. Is they apply too much pressure and they've stripped too much away. But Danna, you have something to add on that?
I don't specifically know much more about that either. I definitely can find out more, and I can get in touch with whoever asked that question. But yeah, I'm not sure on that either.
Yeah, I've heard the reasons why it uses less water. But the couple farms I've been to where they have it, this is me interpreting a little gun shy as to, we use it when we have to kind of approach. And now thinking through it now and talking to other people, I'm getting the sense that it's just beginning to understand it, and it's just used too much. It could too much pressure, so to speak. It's almost like a pressure washer, taken off with less water, the very simplification of it. So kind of a non-answer, but as far as cup profile differences, it goes back to what I just said. Is if it wasn't done properly, of course, that's not going to taste as good. So I don't think it's a fair comparison in most cases. I've had some that's been delicious. So.
All right. Mike mentioned that naturals might benefit from a slightly lower charge temp to avoid scorching the sugars on the outside. Do they benefit from a lighter roast level as well, shorter development time, or is a medium roast better to bring out the sweetness?
Completely subjective. Yeah, yes to all of them. And again, I kind of put Brazils in a different category. I put most kind of pulp naturals and honey. I'm really gentle with. Brazils tend to be a little bit more consistent, so I can have a little bit more control. But using Brazil as just an example, lighter roast, you're going to get kind of this nutty, a little bit more acidity, but they handle dark roast well. Beautiful. I mean, I call Brazil the hidden secret of espresso. Not that you need to have a Brazil for a great espresso, but most great espresso blends that you've heard of out there, Brazil is the number one component. So they can handle that kind of level. So it's very subjective. There's not one right way to roast a coffee.
All right, one more. Would you say a honey process is an attempt to achieve the best of both natural and wash processing?
Danna, your thoughts? I'd love to hear your opinion, then I'm going to answer.
Yeah, let's see. It's fun. It's interesting. We see less demand for pure honey, especially for yellow honey coffee. That tends for us to cut more like a washed coffee, like a little bit of a sweeter washed. And we see a bit more of demand of almost like the sort of polarizing ends of it. So the really, super clean, fully washed. And then we, see the really sort of jammy, fruity naturals. And then where like the yeast can kind of play up either the fully washed or the natural. I don't know. We don't really see like just a lot of demand for honey. So I don't think that I wouldn't say it's almost like trying to get the best of both worlds. I think, I don't know. I kind of see us almost like moving away more from honey.
Yeah, I just think that, my opinion, and this is purely opinion from what I've seen. It started out, and this is, Brazil, it was more, the largest producer, was a way to have a different product, be able to offer a roaster. We've got a natural and we've got a pulp natural. You don't get a lot of wash out of Brazil. Then we started seeing it, in Central America, more as a way, in my opinion, just to differentiate. Wasn't necessarily this is better or different fruit. It's just, we got something different, which is fine. That's what we all try to achieve. There's nothing wrong with that. Now I don't know if I'd say I'm seeing less of it. But I've never thought it was necessarily some of the reasons you talked about different yeast and just better control, other competing organisms, that sort of thing. So, to me, it's more not experimental, but differentiation point than anything else. So anyway, any other questions, Connie?
Let's do one more. I'm kind of a stickler for time, but these are good questions. So, personally, I like the fruity nature of natural processed beans. Do you prefer the wash process for reasons of maintaining consistency for the customer?
I'd like each one of us to offer this. One is I want to be for is that be clear is that as I read that a couple times up there and thinking that it made it sound like I preferred wash because of how I described. The wash process, there's more nuances. And I was very clear that I don't mean it that way. It is, I like both. Okay. But I do find wash kind of year to year, over year, a little bit more consistent in kind of cup profile, so to speak. I'd love to hear Tony and Eileen and Nikki on this really quick.
Well, if we were to jump in here, usually when someone asks me, hey, what's your favorite coffee? And usually the first thing I will say is, well, how many children do you have? And they're like, I've got 2 or 3 or whatever. Why? I said, well, which one's your favorite? And they're like, oh, I see. I said, it depends what mood you're in. Sometimes you're in a mood for a clean washed Guatemalan, or sometimes you're in a mood for a funky New Guinea, where sometimes you're in a mood for a really whiny Ethiopian. So, I tend to drink in my pour overs. I tend to drink a wash coffee, but in our espresso, for example, it has a lot of Ethiopian in it. It has a little bit of Sumatra and some Guatemalan in it. And I just really love the fact that there's so many different flavors with so many different coffees and so many different ways to actually prepare them, that they can be so many different flavors in your mouth all at one time. So,
and as far as customers, they like them all. I wouldn't tend to go just towards wash to have, for my customers. I would, they love being adventurous and trying lots of difference, and they love the naturals and the big strong fruit in them. Sometimes that's how you can kind of get them hooked too, and like in the specialty world, it's like that's something they can kind of identify with, and then they kind of go towards some of the more delicate pieces on it. So I would definitely say there's room for all.
Awesome. Really quickly, Nikki, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes, I completely agree. Customers seem to like it all, especially actually I'd say naturals tend sometimes even more. A lot of our blends use naturals, and they just have a lot of that complexity, full body sweetness. It's delicious. I wouldn't say, it's less consistent or more consistent. I think it's just how you define consistency, but yes, everything.
As long as it's really great coffee, right? As long as it's really good coffee, you get good coffee, they love it.
One quick final note, Connie, that just to touch on something that Nikki had said, that I had written down, and somebody had made a comment, the importance of cupping. And it leads to the very next session. You're going to see a live cupping, that it's going to be some commentary in the background explaining traditional cupping, but what we do when we do quality control, you know, cupping is a very subjective thing. We want to find things we like, but we need to turn it into some kind of as objective as possible so we can use it for business decisions. So it's a little precursor to the next session. So I'm done.
Well, and as far as cuppings go, we don't even call them cuppings. We call them tastings, because we're already assuming that the coffee that we're getting is pretty good. And now we're tasting it to see what that finished product really is going to taste like, you know, so we prefer to go that route.
I'm stealing that.
You can
All
steal
right.
the baby thing too, the kid thing too.
Mike, I can totally see you saying that, by the way, the baby thing. I want to say thank you to the panelists. You guys are amazing. Nikki, I'm pretty sure you're ready to have your own session topic the next time we meet.
I love that.
Actually, you have several comments just to you in the Q&A. If you would mind popping in there and answering those, that would be awesome.
Will do.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all. I will see you out in the tasting room.
Excellent. All right. Our next session is the live tasting session with Renee Espinoza and Lancia Taylor. Renee manages the education programs for Fire Dancer and can assist clients in the design and development of the training programs for specialty coffee. Renee is an authorized SCA trainer, holding the professional level certificates in barista skills, brewing, and roasting. Renee was co-chair of the first professional development committee for the SCA. She has extensive experience in events, restaurant, and cafe management as well. Lancia has over 30 years experience in the coffee and cocoa industry, focusing and delivering results in applying her skills in areas such as marketing and business strategies and campaigns, corporate communications, product positioning and branding, business and development, product development, sales and key account management. Lancia's company, the Taylor Gentleys Group, is an industry consultant for the coffee and cocoa industry. Providing full service consultations, TGG can increase your footprint in the marketplace. TGG offers facility concepts, project engineering, coffee processing solutions, marketing plans, procurement strategy and management, and plant design. Hello, ladies.
Hello.
They're ready.
I hope you hear us okay. I know we have some roasting going on, and we have some cupping happening here. So
all right, it is a little bit echoey, so we'll just bear with you. If it gets too bad, I'll let you know.
that sounds great. We will talk as loud as we can, and I'm anticipating students will be done here shortly, so we're good.
All right.
So my partner in crime here, Lancia Taylor, here she is. So we're gonna talk about this live cupping right now, but I feel the need to make a pandemic live caveat to all of this. So because of our world, our COVID world, the SCA did come out with a specific protocol, new protocol for cupping, as we all are painfully and eager to slurp and spit each other's coffee in the old world. So fast forward to our new world, we actually at Fire Dancer found it just a tad difficult to work with that protocol. So we have reduced our class sizes from 16 to 8. There's 2 tables in front of me, but each student has their own table with their own setup, and they're socially distanced. So there's no sharing. There won't be sharing with any between any of these cuppers here today. But one important factor that we have going on today is everybody back here has been vaccinated. So there you go. All right.
Okay. All right. So what we're doing today, as Renee said before, we're going to view a live cupping of the processing methods that were discussed with Mike's class and also what Carl did in this presentation. As you know, that watching cupping can be a little bit boring. So what we decided to do is to provide some background commentary so you can get a little bit more idea as to what we're doing. The focus is going to be on how cupping for green purchasing differs from cupping for production roast. First, let's explore why people cup. It could be for purchasing coffee and discovering the quality of that coffee and comparing it to the price offered. Does it make sense for my company? You ask yourself sometimes. It could be you have a contract for coffee already. You need to approve the sample. It is also very integral to quality control systems, assuring your customers that they're getting what they expect. Sometimes it's as simple as enriching a palate and educational and training purposes. We all know that cupping is a very subjective process, as Mike mentioned earlier, no matter what approach we take to get to the desired result. We all still look for things we like, that we want to offer, that we ourselves enjoy. In addition, humans are not the most accurate and reliable instrument to use for sensor purposes. So setting up solid sensor protocols helps us to overcome a couple of things. One, adaptation, desensitization from exposure, enhancement or suppression, one factor influencing another, for example. Expectation, you find what you're looking for. Habituation, tendency to give similar responses over time. Stimulus, influence of prior knowledge. Logical, association of two or more characteristics together. Halo effect, the response to one characteristic can influence another. Order of presentation, where a sample can fail, can be important. Mutual suggestion, influence from other panelists. Sometimes, you're cupping and people are talking. You should be quiet, so you give them a chance to do what they're doing, and you focus on what you're doing. Lack of motivation, and that sometimes happens if the panelist isn't interested. Accuracy will decline, we know that. The idea today is to explore cupping protocols that allow us to turn a very subjective experience into something objective, so we can utilize the results for the formal business decision. And that, as far as that goes, I will ask Renee to take over for some of the best practices of sensory analysis that we have.
Thank you, Lancia. So how are we evaluating coffee? So we all know that the protocol that is used in SCA that we use here in our coffee school, and that is also used by by CQI, Coffee Quality Institute, for the Q Grader program. So we all use the same kind of protocol. It's the standard 5 cups in that M shape. You're going from 1 to 5 cups. You are weighing out whole bean coffee according to the size of your glass. You're going to grind to more of a coarser grind. You are going to steep for 3 to 5 minutes. You are going to break, where you're going to be evaluating the aroma. And then you're going to skim all of that lovely slurry off the top, and then you're going to start tasting. Traditionally, that first tasting should happen about 170 degrees, right? And then you're going to make at least 3 passes, because you're going to have your coffee will taste different, at 10 minutes, at 12 to 14 minutes, then at 16 minutes. So you're going to let that coffee cool. And you are not going to be fast in that process, because I will tell you, a lot of defects could be slight, and they're not going to come into play until that long aftertaste. So you want to be patient, you want to be focused, and you want to take into account everything that coffee has. So that's how we're evaluating our grain. How are we going to evaluate our production roast? We can do a couple of different things. So you have your production roast. These kinds of tests, cuppings, as we call them, will come into effect when you're evaluating R&D or you're just doing some simple quality control. These particular cuppings that we're doing right here today, they are going to be for actually roast profile, right? So we have a coffee here, and we actually have a fabulous coffee. It's the Burundi Sima anaerobic process. And we want to figure out what is the best profile that we have. So the goal of this, of the profile that we want is to bring out more fruit and floral notes and overall brightness. So we're going to play with first crack timing and development time for a little bit. But in general, the way that this particular cupping is done is called difference and control evaluation. Many of you out there are very familiar with a good old-fashioned triangulation. That's basically what it is. So triangulation, of course, you have, just like you said, you have a triangle of 3 cups, and you're trying to pick out that odd cup. So if you are doing tasting or cuppings for research and development, you probably will lend yourself more to do a 2 out of 5 triangulation type cupping, where you have 2 control cups and then 3 are the other coffees that you want. The 2 out of 5 statistically offers you the best results overall. So you'll find that in research in the bigger labs, they will probably more likely do a 2 out of 5. So how are you going to get this done? Again, we are using the difference from control evaluation. Now this can be either scored or unscored. So you'll have 1 control sample for triangulation, 1 control sample and 2 out of spec. If something is going on here and say you messed a production roast and you want to see if you can still sell it. Do a triangulation, 1 control coffee from a previous roast and then 2 that are out of spec and see what happens. Or you can do the opposite with the triangulation. You can have 2 control samples and 1 out of spec and see if some of your tasters can pick it out. The 2 out of 5 method is always 2 control samples and then 3 cups are out of spec. So if you're scoring, generally, like what we do here at Fire Dancer, we have our own little score sheet. If you go to ISO.org or some other sensory websites, you can find a more accurate scoring that will go from 0 to 10. We choose a simpler method here. We go from 1 to 5. In our 1 to 5 scale, 1 is no difference. So you went to your tray, you can't find any difference between the out of spec coffee and the control coffee, or complete to number 5, where there is an unmistakable difference. And so then you have to decide what to do with that coffee. You're either going to scrap that whole roast, or if you're thinking out of the box, you might put some hazelnut flavoring or vanilla or something else on it. So all you know is that you can't release that coffee as it is. So who's going to use this kind of evaluation? Your inventory manager comes and says, I think we mislabeled these bags of coffee and we don't know what they are. So based on what you think they should be. You're going to take a previous roast, you're going to do a triangulation, and either it is or it's not, and then you have to decide what to do with that coffee, right? Your CFO comes to you and says, wow, we can get this coffee for 25 cents per pound cheaper, and I think that we should do this. What do? You get a sample and you do a triangulation, or you do the 2 out of 5 to say, is there a difference enough, because we want to make sure that our customer base is staying happy. Your logistics manager, your transportation manager comes to you and says, hey, this container is stuck on a ship. It's not going to be here for at least 2 months, 3 months. It has our main component to one of our most popular blends. You have to find a replacement. That's when you call the importers, you get in some samples, and you start doing some triangulations to find out which is going to give you number one, where you're not going to tell a difference. Now, as I mentioned before, there's lots of tools that you can use out there, ISO being one, ISO.org. And the one that we use most specifically here, of course, is World Coffee Research and their Coffee Tasting Lexicon. And here are our covers.
Shall we get a little closer so they can hear us?
You should.
Hello, all again. So our goal was, we had this coffee we brought from Sucafina, a Burundi anaerobic process. And we felt in tasting it that we wanted more fruit and floral issues, a little bit more brightness. So we did a couple different roasts. Our roast master, John Gozbecki, did. But we wanted to assess them in a very objective manner. So we had the original roast, and then we had 3 different coffees, 3 different roasts of the same coffee, and we just cupped them. And we're going to go through and give you our results and see if we agree upon a winner. So start with John.
Okay, yeah, I felt well, I'm a little taller than you, Renee, so I got to squat down. Yeah, so no, I thought the first sample, 838, it was, had grapefruit notes, nice wininess to it, but it was rather, thin in the cup. Second one was, nice fruit, and great body, but just almost went in the other direction. And the one I thought was probably the best, my best preference was it had a good balance between the fruit we were looking for, the wininess, bringing out the inherent processing of the coffee, and that was my selection.
Okay, let's see if Carl agrees.
Well,
or does it?
The sample 338, which had high acidity, no question, lacking the body, and certainly the depth. I mean, for sure, this was a high acidic type of coffee. 241 had no acidity, muted acidity. Chlorogenic acid totally gone, and all the other organic acids as well. On 489, it came close to the control sample, although the balance was there, the finish was there, the fruity finish was there, but I missed the creaminess of it. So it's not 100% the 625, but 489 was very close to 629, 425.
And last but not least, I generally agree with both of them, okay? And I think we do have a winner in 489. I had to get my glasses on to read it. Little comments, so what we did on them was to change the profile. On the first one, we went a little quicker to first crack to try to bring out that fruit and acidity, but a short development time. So it was lacking some body and depth. So the next one, we tried it a little bit more, same time to first crack, but a longer development time. Try to bring out a little bit more body. As we kind of both agreed, all 3 of us, a little flat still. And then the final one, we took longer to first crack, but we kept a quicker development time. So I think we're pretty close to agreeing. That's going to be our new roast profile, maybe with another tweak. One last comment I'll leave you on. Do not take down those notes as the sweet spot for this particular Burundi. This is our choice, okay? Our way of objectively coming up with a subjective way or a subjective decision that we like it. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen. So,
Maybe some questions.
I mean, this was a very rushed, definitely a rushed process for this presentation, and it's something that we generally, Mike and I, will take all afternoon in our evaluations and be a little bit more deliberate in our evaluations. So, you know, all in all, you know, you're going to set up however works best for you, which is totally great. But I will mention one thing, and it's our most favorite word in coffee. Whatever you do, be consistent. Thank you.
It's true.
Yeah. Why don't you want to say thank you?
No, thank you, Connie. Thank you, everybody. I mean, it's I know it was a little bit loud, but we're in the middle of our lab and we have a class going, so a lot of action going on around us. So hope you're able to hear us properly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was great. And the lab is beautiful. Makes me want to come visit. Our next session, we're going to welcome back Mike and Carl. I don't think they need any introduction, and they're going to review the top questions from the day.
Mute.
There's Mike. Yay. And here comes Carl.
I didn't spill on my shirt.
Okay, or it's stop. Yeah. It's still on, yeah.
We've got your volume, Carl.
Yes, I know. It's the camera. It's not me. It says here, the white. The white one.
There you are.
There he is.
All right, I'll turn it over to the two of you.
Okay. So, Connie, one quick question for you. Is there a list of top questions we have not answered, or are we just going to go from the what comes up?
There is not a list of questions, the top questions from the day. I guess, did you want to just go through the list?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So the first one, it's right at the top, Carl. I'm gonna let you answer. The question is, why Diedrich Coffee Roasters? What is the key specification or capability that differentiate Diedrich from others?
Hold on, I don't see the question. Where do I have to?
They're up in the, I can read them to you.
Okay.
Yeah. So question to you is, why Diedrich Roasters? What is the key specification or capability that differentiate Diedrich from others?
Okay. The difference between the Diedrich roaster and other roasters is the way the drum is designed and the air enters the drum. In order to maintain a certain ratio of convective over conductive heat transfer, we only allow so much air going through the drum, and that is particular for people that starting a roasting business or starting to roast and have not a whole lot of experience with coffee. We basically give them a range of air supply or convective air energy and conductive air energy to roast their coffee without creating an issue with the coffee. So they're not making a mistake from the beginning, or not losing coffee from the very beginning. They're roasting a good coffee from the beginning without knowing a whole lot about coffee. But it is all about the design of how the air enters the drum. And then on top of that is the burner design that we're using on our roasters, which is the infrared burner. They're basically facing nicely across the two sides of the drum, and then applying the controlled energy to the drum for this conductive heat transfer to the coffee. So it's one, controlling the airflow through the drum through a certain special design, and then at the same time using infrared, very efficient infrared burners, transferring the conductive heat or adding to the conductive heat transfer through the drum to the coffee.
Thank you, Carl. So the next one up, I'll take a stab at. The question is there a measurable difference in the amount of sucrose in the various types of honey process, i.e. black, red, and yellow? So one is I was not able to come up with any, other than that general slide I showed, which had washed, natural, and then honey in the middle, that actually showed honey having more sucrose, okay? I did not find anything specific on the different types but I'm going to, just make an assumption though that a black honey, okay, would probably have a higher amount of sucrose and a yellow would have less. But the caveat being, I have not seen the science, and I'm very careful not to kind of just quote opinions or gossip or rumors. But I'm fairly certain that's fairly accurate. So the next question. I guess this one is mainly more for me. Can you explain, in your experience, how does temperature-controlled fermentation affect the flavor profile for green coffee? Most coffee producers are doing experimental fermentations. Do you see these processes progressing into new markets? This is, I don't really have an answer to it, to be honest. So I'm not going to just kind of, swing from the hip, so to speak, here on this one. I do know this is a lot of the work that's happening in CQI, their coffee processing classes, a lot of work that's happening in World Coffee Research, that some people sum up as seed research. It's more than that. They are looking at basically coming up with this data to help farmers make better decisions. I've read a couple articles, white papers on this very subject. They tend to conflict with each other a little bit. So it's kind of a work in process. I do see this progressing into new countries as the science becomes a little bit more understandable and transferable to producers. That's one of the big problems producers have had, is access to this kind of data. So again, a non-answer, but I'm not going to answer with shooting from the hip, so to speak. But as there's more comes out, we might be your source for that information. So the next one we've already answered. Some comments about your experience roasting Colombian naturals. I have only, got to be honest, only roasted one Colombian natural in my life. If any of the other roasters that are still on, Nikki, I don't see Tony. No, I see Tony there. If you want to pop on again, if you have roasted a Colombian natural, not a lot of Colombian naturals out there. It was something that the Federation was not dead set against, but they didn't really allow it. They knew washed because it was a very scientific, controllable. They knew how to deliver that higher quality. Check on it. Maybe even we can ask Rick Reinhardt. He might have a little deeper answer for this, but as to why there's not a lot of Colombian naturals. But I've only roasted one, and I had a good experience. It seemed to roast a little quicker to or more similar to a wash. It was a beautiful coffee. It was a farm I was at. I actually did it on farm in the Medellin region, and it was a beautiful coffee. But it was experimental. So it wasn't even a lot that I had purchased. So, and the next one is actually, I'm not sure if Nikki, you're still around. If you are, there's a question for you, and it's asking if you're using tracking software like Cropster or Artisan, or what are your methods for collecting data?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Are you using tracking software, Cropster or Artisan? If not, what are your methods for collecting that data?
Yeah, I'm actually not using either of those, Cropster, Artisan. What I do, and I wanted to actually say this, is whenever I run manual roasts on Diedrich, and then I save them to be run and then to be edited and then run on automation. And I got to give a great plug here for the Diedrich automation. It works great. It can be executed very well in auto mode, any manual profile you create. I'd love to give anyone advice on how to do that. But no, I do not use any sort of other software. I'm editing profiles and essentially manipulating those curves to run well on auto. So.
Thank you. Next question I'm going to give to Carl. The question is, as far as global warming concerns, does Diedrich, as one of the leading companies of roaster manufacturing, have any plans to develop roasters with electric powered other than gas powered runs?
Yes, we do. We are currently in the process of developing a 3 kilo electric roaster. And certainly we know the market for this. It is not currently necessarily in the US, but Europe and the Asian market, we have a lot of requests for this type of roaster. And yes, we will develop and come out with a roaster of 3 kilos and eventually 5 kilos electrically operated.
Awesome. I only got one more question up, which I'll ask in a second, but I'm just throwing out to everybody. We've got about 9 minutes before Mr. Reinhardt comes back and blesses us with the final words of wisdom. But if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A. Down below on your screen, you'll see a chat box, but there's also a Q&A. And what I'm monitoring is the Q&A. So if you have any final questions for Carl and I, please input them in there. So the next question that I'll answer is, thank you. Do you find that inlet temperature has any effect on helping achieve a specific rate of rise? I'll answer that, and I'll ask Carl for his opinion too, just to see if we're aligned here. So to me, we have bean temp. So we're tracking the temperature of our bean. That's the thermocouple in the bed of beans. Then you have the inlet temperature coming in. You could have an exhaust temperature. I do think there's a correlation. I pay more attention to exhaust temperature, the difference between or environment temp. The difference between your bean temp and your exhaust temp, the bigger difference that is, means that you get more in it. Your rate of rise is going to increase. So normally you have a 20, 25, 30 degree difference between them. And this time you have 50. Your roast may be on track how you want it at that point, but it's probably going to change pretty quickly, and vice versa. Okay. Inlet temperature, I haven't gone in a deep dive where I use that much because all the roasters I have focus more on exhaust temp. Carl, I don't know if you have a difference of opinion or a thought on that. So,
well, no, it's on the right path. And also, I'm going to go back what Nikki said earlier. Certainly, to help in order to increase or to the difference or the rate of change or rate of rise, increasing the charging temperature is a way that helps. But in general, in order to get a higher rate of rise, you have to have the airflow through the roaster. Air works more than temperature, or has a greater effect than temperature, and you cannot limit. I mean, if you're looking for a higher rate of rise, you cannot limit the airflow on the roaster. And on some of the Diedrich roasters, I mean, I run into the limits. I have to say that, and because of the conductive heat and convective heat ratio that we're trying to maintain, there is a certain limit that you can basically eliminate by higher charging temperature, but you need also the full airflow in order to have an effect or support this higher rate of rise.
Thank you, Carl. So last question. And I think this will be one for both of us, Carl, but I'll let you take a stab at it. It comes from Kenny Libby. Nikki just gave props to automation on Diedrich. He has only used it once or twice over the last 3 years on his IR12 without much success. Any tips on how to use it, or is there any training available? Has not been able to find much on how to use this. So thoughts, Carl?
I just didn't catch all of that.
Okay.
What's the automation?
Just gave props to automation. Kenny has only used it once or twice on his IR12. And he's asking any tips on how to use it, or is there any training available on the automation?
Absolutely. there is we do have the people on board that can train people that buying a roaster with the automation features, and that is available either on site or even through video conference, Zoom conference from our office in Ponderay.
Awesome. Any more questions? If not, Connie, I'm not seeing any. There's some specific panel members that I have pushed their way. But I think I'm ready to turn it back over to you, Connie, and start our last talk of the day.
All right. Thank you, Carl and Mike, for tackling the list of questions. All great questions, by the way. Participants, nicely done. I'd like to welcome back Rick Reinhardt to talk about 5 things for the future of coffee. I see Rick's panel, but maybe he's not quite here yet.
We are 4 minutes early, Rick.
I know.
I will text him.
We did forget one thing, Mike.
Yes.
We have the little promotional information from you and Renee. Do you want to run through that real quick?
That is a perfect time.
All right, awesome.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. So we meant to get to earlier, but we ran ran long. So this is just a little bit about who and what Fire Dancer is. Everyone knows who Diedrich is. They're pretty famous. And so I thought I'd take a second to kind of our little plug, our little commercial, and our relationship with Diedrich and how it works. So, I'm the co-founder, and it is a small little company run with my partner in, I don't know why this is moving forward, my partner in life and business, Renee. And our mission is to help coffee companies achieve success. We have experience in the whole supply chain, okay? Things that we help people with are, consulting, regulatory support, and food safety. We are AST trainers, so we train the SEA Coffee Skills Program. We have a tea certification program, as well as a food safety certification program, both for retail, so front of house, and back of house. Different projects that we're involved in and help with is, learning when you're starting out. What is your market? Sorry, this is jumping ahead. Developing a business plan, production inventory control, written food safety plans, production facility and construction, sales and marketing, coffee blend development, roast profile development, QC systems, distribution strategy, regulatory. What equipment do I need to buy? Okay. Risk management. And this is an area in regulatory. I'm sorry, I must have this on a timer. Food safety is a big one for us. And this is one that you're going to see a little commercial after this from a new partner of ours called CYA that we have developed the way to track your plan. Food safety is writing what you're going to do, and then you've got to prove that you're doing it. Okay. As roasters, you fall under the FDA. We have a complete program in that. Oftentimes, and what got me into it is I have found people who have taken a course focused on food safety for all foods, and they overbuild their plan and they don't pass their audits. Coffee isn't a high-risk product, but you still have to have this stuff in place. And so you take a course, you overbuild it. Best advice I have when you head down this path, find somebody in coffee, because they'll write a plan more appropriate to what you need, not beyond. Okay. But the other reason for doing it isn't only that. It's as you grow, you may be required to have a third party food safety audit that an outside certifying body has to come in, and they are tougher than the FDA. But this could be the difference between landing costs go or not. And so having this stuff in place, building the foundation, that's what we can help with. And this is what you're going to see in a second, a little video from CYA of the kind of the back end support of templates. The average food safety plan for a mid-sized roaster doing a couple 100,000 pounds a year is about 100 documents between SOPs, statements, lists, forms, etc. So we have that complete offering available. But most importantly, we are educators. We believe in anything we consult on, whether it's regulatory or coffee, we got to start with a place of education, okay? Because how can we consult or give advice if we not sure you know what we're talking about? We train here in Schaumburg, Illinois, the Complete Coffee Skills Program. We train in Ponderay, Idaho. We can also bring the courses to your location in some circumstances. We offer them in all 5 modules of the Coffee Skills Program of the SCA. We are also the official educational partner of Diedrich. So we do all their training here and in Ponderay, and we're starting to look at consistency of training throughout the world for DiedrichRoasters. So I like to say we're involved 2 places: teaching you how to use it in the first place, and the second part is you have a problem. Diedrich determines it's not the machine, lack of a better term. It's not equipment failure, it's operator error. I get involved to help you, guide you to a solution in some cases. So that is us, Fired Answer Coffee Consultants. And really quickly, I'm going to close my screen. We have a short little video on a new app that we've created with COA to help control that.
CYA Cover Your Assets is asset tracking and service management software designed for the coffee industry. CYA Asset Tracking nails down your deployed equipment once and for all. We help you clean things up, and by tagging machines, you confirm their details and GPS location. Everything is available on the web and mobile, right there at your fingertips when you need it. CYA Service allows you to create specific interventions for reactive or planned services. Again, we help set things up, and then you dispatch them from your computer or your phone and resolve them in the field as you go about your regular business. Then you can easily export the finished record for proof of work and defensive billing. CYA Plus enables you to stay on top of the business-critical interventions of your food safety plan. Here again, we set things up, guided by the industry expertise of Fire Dancer, and your team reacts to the indicators using the tool for ready proof of compliance and certification.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike, for the information about Fire Dancer and the video. I'd like to welcome back Rick Reinhardt to talk about 5 things for the future of coffee. Rick?
Hi, thanks for having me back. Sorry for the late transition. Let me do the share screen thing.
No worries.
And get this into presenter view for you. All right. Theoretically, this is all working now. All right. So I really wanted to talk about coffee in the context of the experience we've all gone through with COVID-19 and frankly are still going through with COVID-19, and try to tease out things that are worth thinking about. And I'm not sure that I have a lot of answers for you, but there are lots and lots of questions and lots of things that you might give some energy to thinking about that will help prepare you for how things are going to go in the near and maybe slightly longer term future. So somebody once said, I think it was Rahm Emanuel, who said, never let a good crisis go to waste. There's an element of that in what we think about here. And it may seem a bit heartless, but I just want to get to the side of that we have to think about what the implications of this global pandemic are for our businesses, for our families, for our industry and for all the folks involved in our industry across the world. So here's a few things to think about, 5 of them exactly. So the first one is this, that here in the US, coffee proved once again to be what we would call recession-proof. So there's long been a good body of evidence that when we enter into economic downturns, coffee seems to be relatively unaffected by these major downturns. Most recently in 2008, 2009, in the wake of the global economic crisis or financial crisis, coffee managed to hold its own. It stayed alive. Sales were good. There were no significant declines. In fact, coffee sales started to grow relatively quickly into that recession. And some of this thinking is that coffee is an affordable luxury, if you will, and it's part and parcel of a sort of a typical American lifestyle. So it's associated with a ton of things in our journey through life, particularly here in the US, but really anywhere that it's consumed on a regular basis. And this was no different. We saw in the immediate beginning of lockdown and the arrival of COVID here, a number of things happened. One of those is that the venues where we typically drink specialty coffee, that is the coffee shops and restaurants and even to some degree office space, those were no longer available for consumption, but people still wanted to drink coffee and they pivoted very, very quickly. And so what we saw was that coffee consumption measured in kilos or pounds of coffee really did not go down significantly. It had a slight flattening, but it changed the point of consumption much more than it changed the degree of consumption. It's still meaningful from an economic standpoint for lots of reasons, principally having to do with how value addition is calculated in the coffee value chain. But there's no question that coffee was persistent in people's lives. Nobody gave up coffee as a part of their life, and things went forward again in a change of venue. But people continued to consume coffee at more or less the same rate that they'd been consuming coffee prior to the lockdown and prior to the onset of the pandemic. Oh, I want to go backwards. All right. Second point that's worth noting is that the consumer shift towards specialty coffee seems to be sticky. This is really important for this venue, and then really just for the nature of coffee consumption in general. In the US, specialty has been the trend leader for more than 20 years now. So coffee started to come off its low point of consumption from back in the 90s, and the per capita consumption started to grow. And all of that growth across that entire 2.5 decades has been driven by the specialty market. So specialty attracted new consumers. It increased the amount of consumption, obviously increased the number of venues where you could acquire coffee, and frankly, just sort of put coffee front and center in people's minds in a way that it had been losing that space really from the mid 60s to the early 90s. This shift towards specialty coffee seems to be sticky. The latest data from the NCA's National Coffee Drinking Trends Survey really indicates that march of specialty coffee as the most engaging point of coffee consumption continues unabated. There's new kinds of products out there. We're seeing, as I noted earlier, millennials in particular are very likely to be consuming ready-to-drink products of one kind or another, principally cold brew or other kinds of cold consumed coffee beverages. But nonetheless, that movement towards something other than a mainstream roasting ground product is continuing. Even as customers shifted from out-of-home consumption to in-home consumption, we saw something that was quite unique. They took their specialty coffee preference with them into their home. So in general, specialty coffee purveyors survived more or less intact. And the ones who did the best in this scenario are the ones who were able to move quickly into online sales and to home delivery and other kinds of at-home consumption modalities. And clearly the consumer wanted to take the good tasting coffee home with them, and they did. And this is a very positive thing. There is interesting survey data that suggests that specialty coffees, especially coffee consumers, especially younger ones, are anxious to get back out in the world and anxious to consume coffee in the coffee house again, which is a good sign. It will remain to be seen how that plays out, given the massive shift in venue of consumption and some of the other outcomes of COVID that have played out in society. Which really is the segue into this. Where we drink coffee, where our venue of consumption is tremendously impactful in a number of ways. One of them is we did some work, it's been almost 7 years ago now, I think, maybe a little less, that looked at the total dollar value of coffee, of the coffee market in the US, and then its total contribution to GDP. And at that time, the total dollar value of the US coffee market was about $75 billion. Total GDP contribution, including employment, rents, leaseholds, occupancy, and taxes, was somewhere around $220 billion. Part of that number is driven, of course, by where the coffee is consumed. When coffee consumers have coffee in a coffee house, the sort of price per gram of coffee goes up because there are other value addition points. So a barista had to grind and brew the coffee, it had to be served, somebody had to maintain the building, a leasehold was in play, likely there's furniture, fixtures, and equipment involved. All those things are part of that value equation for coffee. And when we're drinking coffee out of the home, in a cafe or in a restaurant, there's a bigger hunk of value addition there. And so that drives a lot of what the total retail value of the marketplace is. So if you think about it, in one sense, you might pay, say, $15 for a pound of specialty coffee. That same pound of specialty coffee might yield 15, 16-ounce cups of drip coffee that sell for something like $2.50 each. So they're going to provide $37.50 in revenue per pound relative to the $15 per pound that the whole bean or roasted ground coffee might provide. But there's a bunch of new costs with that. Where we drink is also impactful because it includes an interaction typically with someone who has a stake in the coffee sector. So how do you decide whether your coffee is satisfying, whether your coffee experience is rewarding, whether it represents good value, and how do you further explore how your coffee intersects in your life? Well, for a long time, we had that intersection. We had that knowledge transfer happening between a consumer and a barista, a consumer and a server, a consumer and some other point of contact who was helping to prepare that coffee and serve that coffee. When we retreated to the home to drink, we had to have a different kind of transfer of information. So now that transfer of information is much more likely to come from an online interaction. So likely we're engaging either with a website, with a blog, on social media, in a whole range of other ways, but we're engaging with the coffee sector in a completely different way. We're picking up our knowledge, our insights, and our information, and to some degree, our expectations of how the coffee ought to perform for us from those kinds of online interactions. It has had a tremendous impact, not only on the revenue generated by the coffee sector and the dollar value of the coffee sector and ultimately the GDP contribution, but it's also had an enormous impact on how consumers think about coffee. So consumers have been able to separate, to one degree or another, their thoughts about the experiential portion of coffee consumption. That is, I'm in a place that feels a certain way, holding a certain kind of cup, smelling a certain kind of smell, surrounded by an ambiance, and all of that contributes to that experience of that coffee. Moving it into the home has changed that. Now the equation is, I waited for my coffee to arrive in the mail or from the UPS driver or however it arrived. I'm having to read or understand or learn how to grind and brew that coffee. I'm starting to experiment with that. I'm starting to get some ideas about how it ought to perform. And so I'm starting to have a different kind of interaction. I'm interacting with the coffee with myself as the preparer of that beverage, as opposed to going out of the home and having somebody else prepare it. And that's a different perspective. Even the very same coffee is going to perform differently on commercial equipment than it does in equipment in the home. And it's going to perform differently in the hands of someone who's a professional barista than it does in the hands of a consumer. And a different set of information is available about that coffee. And certainly the consumer is more likely to have absorbed some background information about the coffee from their online interaction. And probably for most people, it's a stickier set of information than just the interaction with the barista. So that point of consumption, that venue of consumption, has huge implications for both the consumer's perception, enjoyment, and receipt of the coffee, as well as the economic value of the coffee sector. It has other hidden implications that we might want to consider. One of the reasons that the point of consumption changed is because people stopped going to work, and because lockdown shut down a lot of cafes and restaurants and coffee bars. Some of that will persist. I'm sure everybody here has had some interaction with speculation about the future of work and the future of offices. Will people return to offices? What will happen to downtown major metropolitan financial districts or city cores, areas where traditionally there's been a lot of commuting workers who are there Monday through Friday, and it has an impact on the kinds of businesses that are present in those geographies and how they function when their key hours are, who their key constituents or consumers are, how they advertise to them, how they might appeal to them, et cetera. Those are unknowns. It does look like the point of consumption will have changed significantly for a long time into the future. And that's both good and bad. On the positive side, many consumers, especially younger consumers, have learned how to make a good cup of coffee at home. And that is something that I think the specialty coffee industry has been pursuing for a long time, to try to educate and train and teach our consumers to do a good job grinding and brewing coffee and making good beverages out of good source material. So that should be a benefit that pays off for us. Although there is undoubtedly some pent-up desire to return to the coffee house, to have that opportunity to see people, to be out in the world, to have somebody else prepare coffee for you, to engage in the way that coffee houses have traditionally encouraged us to engage with each other. That will come back. It remains to be seen to what degree, and much more specifically, in what locations. We saw a big shift towards suburban locations for many coffee houses. The national chains in particular saw a shift towards much more volume at their suburban locations. And when surveyed, consumers indicate that they would like to see more coffee houses closer to where they live, which is probably indicative of a future in which the distance from work for a coffee house is going to be a different part of the equation than it has been in the past. It'll be interesting to see what happens to commercial leases and rents in downtown cores, how that will influence the business model that is a cafe, and it's well worth observing. But the thing to keep in mind is that the point of consumption, the venue of consumption, is meaningful in this equation of coffee. This thought really has a lot to do with the interaction of what we think of as a public sector response to the pandemic, and the private sector response, as well as the sort of general global response. So let's think about this for a minute. Here in the US, we saw a huge range of public sector responses. From early on, we had a federal government that was somewhat disengaged from a coherent response to the pandemic, and it fell to state and local governments to devise their own sets of responses. That shifted over time, and with the newly elected administration, the focus became very federal in nature, although it remains somewhat disparate. But the net result of that is the public sector response here has now sort of peaked into wide distribution and availability of vaccinations, a relaxing of some of the strictures for interaction. Looks like spaces will reopen. And in general, in the US, we seem to be trending fairly quickly towards a more normal approach to life as a result of the public sector response. But the public sector response in the rest of the world has been even more varied, and is driven to some degree by social and political aspects. And in producing countries in particular, it's very much driven by economic circumstances. It remains to be seen what the long-term impacts will be. I would presume, and I would certainly hope, that the wealthy nations of the West and the North in particular will work very hard to make sure that vaccinations are globally available and to overcome any kinds of vaccine hesitancy, and in that effort help to relieve some of the ongoing stress and the potential danger of additional outbreaks in the rest of the world. That may take some time to materialize, but for coffee producing countries, many of them have been economically disadvantaged and unable to mount a strong public sector response, or have had social and political constraints to a strong public sector response. Brazil in particular has had some real challenges, although the impacts on coffee production have not been strongly felt in the sector. They are certainly have been felt to one degree or another, and some of them are shadows of those impacts around logistics and transportation, besides labor issues, et cetera. But certainly they're contributing to social unrest in other parts of Mesoamerica and South America. They are clearly obvious in terms of the turn of events in India. The need for a broad and coherent public sector response to making vaccines available, to having public health concerns reach a consistent level. This is clearly not yet accomplished, and the implications not only for coffee and for our sector, but more profoundly for people who live in areas where coffee is a significant part of the local culture or economy. Those implications are profound and potentially devastating. So we'll have to keep an eye on how that unfolds. I would, again, I'm cautiously optimistic that North America and European economies and political structures will respond in a meaningful way to making vaccines widely available and at a reasonable cost. And that would do a lot to alleviate the challenges and the potential disasters that are looming out there in other parts of the world. And finally, I really thought a lot about putting this as the first thing I wanted to talk to you about. And frankly, in most of the conversations I've had over the last year with businesses that I've consulted with, and with many individuals with whom I have some sort of mentoring relationship, is this. And this, there's good science to suggest that this is true. And I think most of us have the life experience to suggest that this is true. And then there's fantastic amounts of work that have been done from the brand and marketing standpoint that would put this forward as a hard truth. The perceptions about you or about your business or about your brand that were formed during the peak of the crisis will be very hard to change. So how people perceived you in the midst of crisis is likely the perception that they'll hold for their balance of their interactions with you. And this is a critical thing to think about. People who were perceived, brands who were perceived, governments that were perceived as unable, unwilling, or unconcerned to rise to the challenges that were brought on by this crisis, they'll be perceived that way for many, many years to come. And it will be very hard for them to shift that perception. Coffee in general fared well, in general, coffee companies did a good job of rising to meet the crisis. I read a little bit somewhere that donations of coffee to healthcare providers and services went up by 800% in the first weeks of the lockdown. And it was readily apparent here in the US. You can see that coffee became a thing that we felt we could share and that we could do for first responders, for frontline medical workers, for caregivers of all kinds, that at the very least we could contribute coffee to them. The coffee sector did a good job with that. The general public did a good job of assuming that as a viable opportunity. We do have some weaknesses in various segments of industry in terms of what the nature and quality of our response were. And certainly in significant parts of the public sector, responses were probably less than adequate, I guess would be the nicest way to frame that. And on a state by state, locality by locality basis, those judgments will be felt undoubtedly. In general, those places where the public sector responded most effectively and most efficiently and most empathetically, they'll retain that whatever social capital that imbues on them into the future. Places where the public sector was a poor, slow, or hard responder, they also will retain that perception for some time to come. In general, this is good news for coffee. Coffee entered the scene of the pandemic as a part of the fabric of our lives that contributed to our enjoyment of life, our ability to interact socially, and to our general physical health. And it leaves the pandemic with all of those intact and more. The health implications for coffee continue to trend in a very positive direction. People undoubtedly miss the social interactions that are fomented by coffee, and people who enjoyed specialty coffee or good quality coffee at home continue to want to do that, and they want to extend their enjoyment of those coffees out into other venues of consumption. But it is worth reflecting on each of us as individuals, and those of you who own or operate businesses, on this concept of how you react to crisis and how that influences the perceptions that the people and institutions around you have of you, your business, or your brand. So these are 5 things I think are worth thinking about. There are many others that are questions that are as yet unanswered. What will this mean for the future of work? What does this mean for the future of our social interactions? What does the future of coffee look like from a logistics standpoint if we don't answer the challenges still caused by the pandemic in producing countries? And frankly, what's the nature of value creation and value distribution in our supply chain? I think having to make coffee at home for consumers is one way that they change their perception about the value creation that is imbued by a barista making them a drink. I think that will manifest itself in many ways. One of the most likely ways is it looks like we can expect this sort of thoughts about wages for service workers, particularly those who deliver something that's meaningful and emotionally resonant with us. I think those wages will increase. I think that we definitely have seen really strong indications that consumers are more likely to look at the ethos of the products they consume, coffee being particular amongst those, for their sustainability, for their ability to be environmentally sound, for their impact on climate change, and for their fit into the social fabric, both at the point of origin and the point of consumption. So in general, I'd say it bodes well for us, and it's my hope that that coffee will continue to thrive, and that specialty coffee in particular will continue to thrive.
Rick, thank you for always looking forward and sharing your insight. You're truly one of the best forward thinkers that I know, and our coffee industry is so lucky that you're part of it. Unfortunately, our day is coming to a close. I want to thank all the speakers and panelists. We had some great discussions here today. I hope that all of the attendees enjoyed it as much as I did and that it was helpful. Maybe you gained some new insight or have a few takeaways to work on later. That's certainly what we hope to accomplish. We'll be sending a follow-up survey to you soon, which will include a link to the recorded sessions that I'm sure we can watch Carl's session about 100 times so we can try to understand the chemistry of coffee better. Thank you to the Diedrich and Fire Dancer teams, and of course the team here at Roast and Kirsten Nelson for working behind the scenes. You are all my coffee heroes. And especially thank you to everyone joining us here today. Hopefully we'll be back for in-person events soon. Mike, Carl, Renee, Lancia, hop on and let's say goodbye.
Thank you for you and the Roast team for all the support that you've given us. I was a little bit nervous in the beginning, but you guys came through, and all the members of the team on all sides, from all sides, we've done a marvelous job. And as you said, I hope that we've given something to our registrants that they can take away and learn from. And we believe in education and sharing and collaborating. So for us, it was a pleasure to do it.
Us too. Renee, any closing thoughts?
Yes. I just always continued to bask in the awesomeness of you and Roast Magazine and your entire team. So,
come on. So nice.
No, I mean, it was great. It was great. The feedback has been wonderful. So we really appreciate that. And yeah, feel free to reach out. We loved doing this. If you want to see something else, hear something else, we are in the works of planning a virtual event that will get specific into food safety, developing a HACCP plan,
nice.
And the automation with CYA for coffee roasters, because that's, with pandemic life, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel for that. The inspectors are going to be out in droves again. So we want to make sure you are all prepared. So thank you.
Mike, closing words?
Once again, I'll echo my wonderful partner in business and life, Renee, that you're awesome, Connie. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We couldn't put this together. We can talk a lot, but we can't put this stuff together. So thank you. And thank you everyone for attending. I hope we took a shot at what we thought would be interesting and beneficial. And please respond to Connie's survey, because we plan on doing more, but we want to make sure it's relevant for what everyone's looking for. So thank you. Thank you for taking a day and spending with us.
Same. All right. Any final words? Rick? Anyone? All right. Thank you again to all the panelists, to the coffee community. We wouldn't be here without you. Thank you. And reach out to us if you need anything.